Joining us now, Congressman Dr. Rob Wittman, 1st District of Virginia, one of only 4 Republicans still standing in the Federal House of Representatives from Virginia. When I first got here, I think there were 8. Now there's 4. It's been cut in half. Obviously, I've had a big positive impact, haven't I? Probably shouldn't have even said that, right? There were 8. Now there's 4. But one of them is Rob Wittman, and he's with us now, as he is every single week, gracing us with his insight and presence. Dr. Wittman, happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. Great to have you.
Well, thank you, John. Happy Thanksgiving, post-Thanksgiving to you and your family. And I know you're looking forward to a very Merry Christmas season and a prosperous and joyous New Year. So we want to wish that to all your listeners and your family, too.
Thank you, Dr. Wittman. Thank you so much. Okay, so we were supposed to get Tax Cuts 2.0 passed in the House during the lame duck session because that was going to take the personal tax cuts and make them permanent. And now we're understanding that a vote on that has been canceled because Ryan, your outgoing speaker, says you don't have the votes. How could you not have the votes? How could you not have the votes to make the tax cuts for working people permanent? How could you not have the votes?
Well, I agree, John. It is very puzzling to me because the back and forth, the criticism of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was that it didn't make the individual tax cuts permanent, and that was a criticism by the other side. So it seems like to me that if that was a criticism and what somebody thought was lacking in that bill, wouldn't there be support to make those tax cuts for individuals permanent? That would seem logical to me, and would seem logical that you'd want to bring that to the floor to have a vote on that. Listen, there are a lot of other things in the tax extenders bill that need to be done that are good things, but I would agree this is just one of those straightforward common sense things that people have pointed to as a shortcoming of the original bill. Why wouldn't you want to bring that bill to the floor? Why would you want to correct that with this opportunity?
That's my question to you. I mean, our listeners tuning in, I mean, it was like, okay, work your tail off to get a Republican majority back in the House of Representatives. There's a lot of frustration now, because we went from losing what we thought was 27 seats on election night to what is going to be 39 or 40 seats, all in California. Nobody understands why we got blown out there at the end with all the mail-in ballots and what they call a voter harvesting, whatever the heck that is. Nobody can figure that out either. But then it's like, okay, so we gave you all this money, we did all this work to get a majority, but you have a majority now, and you can't make the tax cut, which was the centerpiece of your campaign, permanent. And it's like people are calling me up and saying, what's the point?
Oh, I know. Well, I think some of this, John, goes to this back and forth with the Senate, and the Senate saying, well, we can't get 60 votes for cloture, therefore the House, you do this in order to send us a bill that can be passed in the Senate. I look at that differently. I think that the House has an obligation to debate and pass a bill that can pass out of the House, and then get the Senate to debate that. Put the Senate on notice about debating these the permanency of these tax cuts that were enacted into law. I mean, to me, the House needs to legislate separate from, not in control of the Senate, of which we're not. I think sometimes we try to project out, well, what will pass in the Senate, and I'm adamant that that's not the way the House should operate. The House should say, let's vigorously debate bills in our body. Let's get those things done. Let's send them over to the Senate and let the Senate have the debate. Let them go back and forth about what they want or what they don't want. Let them be on the record about why, if somebody there doesn't believe these tax cuts for individuals need to be permanent, let them debate as to why that shouldn't be the case. I get frustrated sometimes that we get controlled by the other body. This should be about what the House does.
Dr. Wittman, I agree with you so much. I mean, in 30 seconds there, you just laid out what everybody's frustration is. Go ahead and do what you got to do in the House. and then let the Senate have to reject it and then tell us why. And then, let's call up Mitch McConnell's office and ask him why we still have a 60-vote cloture rule when you've got 50 senators that'll vote for making tax cut for working people permanent. I mean, this is a bigger picture than your arcane Senate rules that somebody made up in order to have the, Senate Incumbent Protection Act or whatever they do in there. I mean, go send them the bill, and then if they reject it, then it's on them, right?
Well, that's it. That's it. That's the way our founding fathers had this government designed. They wanted vigorous debates in both bodies and have both bodies, be on the record as far as what they want or what they don't want, and make the arguments. If you don't like making these tax cuts permanent, then have the open debate and back and forth about why you don't think they ought to be permanent or why you think they should be permanent. And both bodies ought to do that. It shouldn't be one body saying, well, we have to pass something that we think will pass in the other body. That I think sometimes, limits what we can do in the House and limits the extent of the debate that needs to occur over in the Senate.
So where do we go from here?
Well, the House will pass its version today of essentially what's called tax extenders, which is the whole realm of tax code provisions. What happens there? Some of the expiring provisions in the tax code, fixes to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and other things. That will be on the House floor this morning, and I think will pass out. And then it goes over to the Senate, and the Senate will then take that up. And then, of course, the House still has, where we have passed before, appropriations, including Homeland Security, including funding for the wall, which we have passed out of the House, the $5 billion for border security. That will go over to the Senate. So there's still back and forth negotiations there. And again, that's one of those linchpins. The House has passed $5 billion. The Senate is not at that particular point. So the push is how do you get to that point over in the Senate? So that's one of those remaining elements that has to be done prior to December 7th. Because remember, December 7th is when the current continuing resolution runs out. So that's the deadline for this to avoid a partial shutdown of operations involving the appropriations on the 15% of the spending that didn't get done with the group of appropriations bills that passed back in September.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, trucking the truth across America, live to you from your nation's capital. We're with Republican Congressman Dr. Rob Wittman, and he represents the 1st Congressional District of Virginia, which is kind of the central Virginia area up through Fredericksburg. Congressman, the December 7th resolution ending, those of us here that work in D.C. know that there's all downside politically to a shutdown, especially before Christmas. The fake news is going to spin it 3 ways to Wednesday. They're going to be talking about, Johnny can't get his Christmas toys. We never win these, right? Republicans get annihilated with these. They don't have the machine to even touch combating the fake news narrative. So how do we avoid a shutdown, which I think would be a disaster now for Republicans?
Yeah, and I don't think any of us want to shut down, John, but I think everyone, regardless of your political affiliation, looks at what's going on at the border and says that border security is indeed an issue, as well as other immigration policy reforms that are absolutely necessary. So I think the American public expects us to do both. I think they look at us and go, hey, listen, get this done on time. Don't shut the government down. Do what's right for border security. Get the dollars in place that are necessary for both building a wall, providing the other necessary resources as far as personnel, sensors to determine who may or may not be coming across illegally, put in place a system. I mean, one of the elements that we see with all these people seeking asylum that I think is something that has to be addressed is we need immigration judges there at the border. So when people come through port of entry legally pursuing asylum, that they can get a quick adjudication of their claim of asylum. That's one of these things, too, that has to happen. The caravan with this thousands of people now have just, inundated the system where we can't process those people in a timely way. So that has to be part of this. And the American people expect us to get that done. I think that it can be done. Now, you're not going to get all the different elements of that done, but at least you can get the beginning of the financial resources necessary to secure the border, to make sure that we have enough immigration judges there to quickly adjudicate these cases. So people are pursuing asylum, they can get a quick determination, either yes or no. And if it's no, then they'll go back. If it's yes, then they come in legally for that. And that to me is just simple, common sense, straightforward operations of government that have to happen, that haven't happened at this point. And I think the American people see the outcome of not addressing these immigration issues by what's happening at the border right now. So, what better time now with the stark reality of what we're facing than now to get this done, get these appropriations done, get border security there, put the necessary resources in there. The $5 billion, I don't think, is an unreasonable request to be able to do that, and get that done. And you're right. The American people expect us to be able to do both. They expect us not to shut the government down. They expect us to get this appropriation done. They expect us to secure the border. They expect us to have the resources for an orderly and thoughtful immigration system. Those are not unrealistic expectations. Those are things that Congress must do and should get done on time.
What you just articulated, can you get that out of the House?
Well, it is passed out of the House previously, so yes, I think we can get it out of the House. So the question is, can you get the 60 votes in the Senate? And again, this is one of these situations where the negotiation right now is not with the House. The negotiation right now is with the Senate. What can you get 60 votes on in the Senate? And unfortunately, that's what drives, what policy comes out of the House. I would prefer for the House to say, hey, here's our bill, send it over there, and if the Senate's got changes with it, allow enough time for the Senate to say, well, this is what we pass, have it then go to a committee of conference, which is where the negotiation takes place. The problem is now you've compressed the time down to where we have 7 days left before the December 7th deadline. So if something doesn't pass out of the House today, which it will not because it's not on the calendar, then there's nothing on the House side to kind of force the negotiation on the Senate side. Now, the conversations have been on the Senate side between the Senate Majority Leader and Senate Minority Leader about what can get the necessary 60 votes for cloture over there. And that's, unfortunately, the bill that will drive the process. So it's that bill that will then be thrust upon the House to say, well, this is something that will get 60 votes in the Senate. House here, you take it up, and then you find the 218 in the House to be able to pass that. That's on appropriations bills. Remember, John, appropriations bills originate in the House. So that's not the way I think it should be done, but it's the way the process is unfolding because of the cloture rules in the Senate. And that is, the 60 votes is kind of the driver in what piece of legislation has the chance of passing and getting to the president's desk.
True or false? Mitch McConnell could get up today and say, you know what, this just isn't working for America. It's not working for the men and women that get up every day and punch a clock. So I'm going to get rid of this cloture rule because, it's so. Look, he's got a 53-47 majority in the Senate. I don't give the Democrats a 10% chance of taking the Senate in 2020, and that would Trump on the ballot. There's a state or two they might win. There's a state or two the Republicans can win. They would have to win 3 seats and beat Trump in order to gain working control. Doesn't he have the power to just get rid of that this afternoon, the cloture rule?
The Senate has the full power to change their rules, and the cloture rule is something that has changed from years ago. Remember, it used to be the filibuster was somebody had the option to get up and speak, and as long as you continue to speak on the bill, there was no time limit, and the bill would stay before the Senate without requiring a vote. I think it was back in the 1970s, and I'll have to check on the exactness of the dates, that the rule changed. It went from the filibuster rule being somebody in the Senate getting up and speaking, and you can speak as long as you want, But once you stopped, then the legislative process continued on to a cloture rule where you had to have 60 votes in order to advance any piece of legislation. So that was the replacement for the filibuster. So that's what it's become today. And yes, the Senate can change its rules and how it operates to go back to the filibuster. I mean, if people want to have the ability for a bill that they just are adamantly opposed to and are in the minority, they would still have the ability to get up and express their displeasure, their concerns, or things that they would want to see changed in the bill. So it wouldn't truncate the legislative process. It would just change how the bill progressed or how it does not progress now under the 60-vote cloture rule.
You know what? This is for people out in America looking at this. I mean, it's too much to take. It's like I don't want you to shut the government down. I don't want illegals overrunning the country. I want some kind of a wall. And I like my tax cut that I'm going to get in April to be permanent. And you got the votes in the House to do that. You can do them both. You get to the Senate, you have the votes in the Senate, but you don't have 60 because the Democrats play politics with it. And you could change a rule, but you don't because of your stupid arcane rule. You just don't change it because you have some fear of the future. I don't know what the fear is. It's very frustrating, Congressman. And you know that when the shutdown starts to loom and CNN puts the clicker on, I mean, it's a lose-lose. I mean, how many times have we been down this battle? Like, you cannot win this. After a while, it's like, Charlie Brown and Lucy kicking the football. After the 10th time that you fall on your butt, you stop doing it. And so a shutdown is always a disaster for Republicans because we can't control the narrative. Doesn't matter what it's over. Doesn't matter. The fake news will control this narrative again. And so...
Well, and John, too, remember, too, a government shutdown is seen as the American people, and rightfully so, as a failure of Congress to do its job. And that's the bottom line. And I think that's the compelling part of this that should push things forward and get things done. And you're right. People's eyes glaze over when you talk about process. But, process does matter. And I think today, for more and more people, process is something that they start to think about. And they go, well, why do we have these archaic practices in these bodies which keep things from getting done? Those are compelling questions that have to be asked. I mean, that's one of the reasons I've been an advocate on the House side to change the process, to make sure members of Congress suffer if a budget doesn't get done on time. You don't get paid. If you don't get all appropriations bills done on time, which, by the way, if we did, we wouldn't be in this predicament by the end of July. And if not, you don't get to go home on vacation. I mean, I think people look at those things and go, gosh, that's just simple, straightforward common sense. It's how everybody else has to operate. Why does Congress operate differently than anybody else has to operate to be able to get the job done and get it done on time? And I think those are realistic questions, and ones, as you know, you and I have talked about it, and I've been working on it for years to try to fix the system to get it to actually operate the way it's supposed to and make sure that members of Congress are accountable, responsible, and suffer the consequences for not getting the job done. And this is where we end up when those things don't happen.
It's a long, lonely road, no question about it. Congressman Rob Wittman, thanks for being with us. Hey, for more information, you can go to wittman.house.gov. That's wittman.house.gov. Sign up there for his newsletter, and you're going to get one thing you're going to get from Rob Wittman. You're going to get the truth.